It's time to get the story behind the story. Interviews with newsmakers, newsbreakers, and Vermonters making a difference. WCAX presents 802 News with Mark Johnson. Here's Mark.
Award-winning journalist and author Ray Suarez is scheduled to appear at the Cathedral Church of St. in Burlington on Sunday, July 20th. First, he'll preach at the 10 a.m. worship service. Following the service, Suarez will give a presentation about his latest book, We Are Home, Becoming American in the 21st Century. A speaking engagement the following week at the Worthen Library in South Hero on July 23rd is already sold out. In this edition of 802 News, sponsored by Red Hen Baking Company, Suarez talks about the evolving history of immigrants coming to America and the latest crackdown by the Trump administration. First, this. At Red Hen Baking Company, they believe pure, uncomplicated ingredients in the hands of skilled artisans are the building blocks for great food. They're dedicated to creating the best food from the best ingredients. You'll find an ever-changing lineup of delicious pastries, sandwiches, and soups at their beautiful cafe off Route 2 in Middlesex, just off I-89. Their breads are also available in many other locations. Led by owners Randy George and Eliza Kane, Red Hen Baking Company has been on the leading edge of the local food movement since 1999. I'm here with Ray Suarez, who has a long time history as a journalist and author, worked for a long time for PBS. And you're coming to Vermont. What's your connection with the folks at St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral?
Well, one of the canons there, Walter Brownridge, is an old friend. And when he heard I was coming up to South Hero Island to speak at the Worthen Library, he said, well, hey, would you be interested in speaking at the cathedral on the previous Sunday? And I said, well, yeah, absolutely. I'm always interested in speaking to church audiences. So I thought that I would just be doing adult education or a program after the service or something like that. So I was very surprised when the dean got in touch and invited me to preach.
You wrote this oral history, We Are Home, Becoming American in the 21st Century. That was published in 2024 and really was a welcoming of people in other parts of the world to the United States, and seemed to be a much more positive view of the experience of being an immigrant.
I don't really call it, Mark, positive as much as realistic, illustrating the lived lives of the people who've come here since we changed the immigration laws in 1965, scrapped the old European-centered quota system, and opened up the doors to the rest of the world. It's changed the country, it's changed who comes here and from where, and it is telling the story of what America will be like later in this century. And, you know, I was talking to one of the best-respected demographers who watches American numbers, William Fry at Brookings. And he said, look, you know, even if the nationalists won the argument now and no more immigrants came, the cake is baked. This country's going to change in the way that's been projected. And even if you stopped immigrants entirely from coming from South Asia, from East Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, this country would become a majority non-European descended country sometime in the late 2040s. So, you know, we can argue about it, we can fume about it, we can march around statues of Robert E. Lee with burning torches, we can do all that stuff, but our future is already set. And I hoped that my book would add a realistic note and also a hopeful note to what this country is and what it's becoming.
Do you think people outside this country are going to continue to want to come to this country in the same way that they did a year, or, as you mentioned, 1965 is a real demarcation point?
I think there'll certainly be a dip in interest. I think the kind of nationalism we're seeing in the United States is also present in places like Australia, Great Britain, France, Germany, places that had in the recent past been big ports of entry for people fleeing their own countries. We will have a lull, certainly, because the president and his henchman, Stephen Miller, are doing everything they can to send the message to the world that America is not a welcoming place. You may put all kinds of asterisks and all kinds of qualifiers and say, oh, but you educated people, we don't mean you, and you whitish people, people who want to come here from Norway, in the words of the president, we don't mean you. But I don't think that's going to work. Yeah, you may be directing your fire at people from the Congo and people from Brazil and people from Venezuela, but the message gets out in a more general way that the United States is becoming a different place, becoming a less welcoming place. And it's really up to us in the coming years to decide whether that's a permanent change in the state of affairs or something that's just a blip during this Trump era. That's what remains to be seen.
Let's just go back here for a moment. In your book, you talk about this demarcation point of 1965. What changed in 1965 that made this a much broader group of people that became immigrants?
By 1960, the percentage of the American population that was born in another country had dropped to 5% from the 20th century high from the 1910 census of about 14%. So what happened was we closed the door partway in 1924. Worldwide economic depression and economic chaos followed, then a world war, and then a baby boom. And all those factors together sort of conspired against large numbers of people coming from places around the world. And our immigration law was tilted toward Europe. Europe was experiencing a post-war boom. The French call it les 30 glorieuses, the 30 years of glory. The Germans call it the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. So people weren't interested in coming here from the places that American immigration law was tilted toward. There were quotas. The Belgians weren't pouring in to fill out quotas. The Dutch weren't pouring in to fill out quotas, though a large number of Dutch did come in the early 1950s and settled in the Midwest. So Lyndon Johnson, at the urging of Brooklyn Congressman Emanuel Seller in the House, Midwestern Senator Phil Hart, they were co-sponsors of a new immigration formula that would make us a little less embarrassed in the eyes of the developing world as the United States tried to be a beacon of freedom in the still fairly young UN. And it was a Cold War law. It was also a law that recognized that Europeans didn't really want to come here that much anymore. There was a lot of labor hunger because even in the midst of tremendous Vietnam War spending, there was also an economic boom underway in the 1960s. And all those things in their way, the Cold War, the UN, the realities of the global South and the developing world, the realities of trade flows and labor hunger, all of that pushed Lyndon Johnson to start twisting arms in the House and Senate, where the Democratic Party enjoyed enormous majorities in both the House and Senate, the kind of the like which we may never see again. And they passed the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act The quotas were scrapped. There was more emphasis put on family reunification, and it was easier to come to this country from places like Bolivia and Senegal and for the Philippines. And people did. And I tell their stories in my book, along with a parallel history of American attitudes toward immigration.
You said last year that Trump, when he was running, was skillfully manipulating people's nostalgia when he talked about immigration. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think, and we certainly saw this at the time of the dedication of the Ellis Island National Monument in New York Harbor, at the centennial of the Statue of Liberty. We saw it during the bicentennial and the interest in history and family history and genealogy that flowed from those years, that there was an abiding love for a certain kind of immigrant. Seen in a sepia-toned photograph, in a now unstylish but then perfectly normal hat among ladies and gents, carrying boxes and bundles off of ships that came from Hamburg and Naples and Nice and Marseille and Southampton. We love those immigrants, the ones in the old film that's slightly off kilter in its speed, so they're waving little American flags a little too fast and walking along the pier with their little kids. We love those immigrants. And we also rhapsodize about those immigrants, pointing out that they did it the right way. They followed the rules. They came the right way, as a way of differentiating them from the modern era of immigrants. But the reason they came the right way is because there were almost no rules involved in coming here. And such rules as there were basically excluded people from Asia and barred them by law from becoming naturalized. Until the 14th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, no person except a white person could be naturalized and become an American citizen. So we love the Italians and Poles and Germans and Irish and all of those people who came in that big wave from roughly 1870 to 1920. A lot of people came before, but they aren't as emotionally or textually available to us. There are fewer photographs of people who came in the 1840s. There's no film of people getting off at Castle Garden to go into Castle Clinton in Lower Manhattan to be naturalized before Ellis Island opened. So we love that big surge tide that came after the Civil War was finished. And we don't love as much or in the same way people who are coming today from China, from Vietnam, from West Africa, Liberians, Nigerians, Senegalese, Ethiopians coming from the Horn of Africa. We see them in a different way from the way we see our own great-great-grandparents from County Donegal or from Naples and similar places on the map of Europe. And that is an exercise in nostalgia, but it's also an exercise in judgment, as all those people talk about how their own relatives followed the rules. And confidential to all those people who say that, a lot of them didn't follow the rules. But there was nobody to check with because there were no computer databases, and there were no printouts, and there were no internet searches, and there was no documentation. When you landed, you were asked if you were wanted for trial in any jurisdiction, and you could just answer no, and you were in. You might be on the lam in your home country. You may be fleeing conscription, as Donald Trump's grandfather was from Bavaria. You may have all kinds of problems back home. You may, as many family histories quietly conclude, have another wife and a different family back in your hometown. Fleeing here allowed you to flip over the Etch-a-Sketch and shake it and start with a clean slate. And we don't tell that story quite as much. So we love those people and we take off some of their rough edges.
This whole immigration crackdown has hit pretty close to home here in Vermont. We had Moshe Madawi, who was led some of the protests at Columbia about the Palestinian question in Gaza. We have had a crackdown at the state's largest dairy farm. We have just recently have had a court hearing with two people that are originally from Mexico delivering food to some of the farm workers. And I mean, this is a real surprise, I think, to many people in Vermont. What do you think the motivation is here on the part of ICE, the Trump administration?
I think this is like the old boiling frog fable. They're slowly turning up their heat. They're seeing what the public will tolerate. They may be surprised at just how well we're tolerating masked men with no identification hustling people into vans and cars. There are literally, according to Tom Homan, the immigration czar, thousands of teams now at work across the country, in places large and small, but overtly ordered by the president to concentrate on red states and on blue states, overtly ordered by the president to concentrate on blue states and blue cities. He understands that much of the labor force in agriculture is undocumented people, but he wants the burden, he wants the hammer to fall in some places and not others, and he's not making a secret out of it. So certainly Vermont, while not home to a major metropolitan area, is heavily agricultural and true blue, so it can expect its own share of attention, I guess, as this thing moves on. It's going to get a lot worse too. And I think the question will be an open question. Is this really what you voted for? A lot of people are here for it. They're totally gung-ho. They want it to be mean and shocking and almost convulsive in its effect, as thousands of people will be swept up and transported to places far away. When Mahmoud Khalil was arrested at the end of the Columbia demonstrations, he's a New Yorker, he's a legal permanent resident, citizen wife, swept up and sent to Louisiana. Why? Was there no place to intern Mahmoud Khalil closer to his home? Of course there was. They want to make this as grueling as possible, to show the state as a fist, as a bludgeon, and it's working.
But why?
Well, I think the president and the people he's appointed to fulfill these tasks took the temperature of a part of America, the part that put them in charge in a very close election, and said, all right, we're all in for the people that support us. Donald Trump's hired large numbers of undocumented people in the past. This isn't something that's close to his heart, near and dear. It's a nationalist flex. It's certainly something that satisfies the desires of a big part of his base. They believe the country has been given away to marauding hordes of people from nowhere who nobody knows who they are. The Republicans were very effective in the run-up to the 2024 election in defining immigration as an issue. So many people believe many things that aren't true about who came here from where during the last 3 or 4 years. And right now, I was just at the border a couple of weeks ago, quiet, Both legal and illegal crossings are way down. He's achieved his desired effect. And now the question becomes, what do you do with the people already here? The average undocumented person in the United States has been here more than 10 years. That's not a border jumper. That's not somebody who you catch on an inner tube making their way across the Rio Grande. That's a person with a job and a paycheck and a pay stub, often who's been paying taxes, often with citizen children, often with mortgages and leases and car loans. These are people who are embedded in our economy, and just whisking them away and often sending them to countries that they are not citizens of is a way of showing the power of the state and a way of showing the people who made you president again that you're keeping faith with them, that you too believe that this has gotten way out of hand, and this is us reasserting control over who gets in and what Americans are like. I mean, Donald Trump is not scornful of immigrants from Ireland, and there are large numbers of undocumented people in the Northeast from Ireland. They're not the targets of the crackdowns as much as people from the Middle East, from Africa, and from Latin America.
Have you been surprised that the courts, and particularly, I guess, the Supreme Court, the allowance of this to happen?
Well, they are textualists. They love to tell us that they are textualists. And the plain text of immigration law gives the president a lot of power and a lot of discretion over managing the flow of people into this country. That much is true. And not looking at who is president, but simply looking at the desire of a president to do these things, a textualist Supreme Court is almost bound to conclude that he has the sole right to make the rules in this area. Now, an interesting impasse will come, I think, with the not yet finished fight over birthright citizenship, because the plain text makes it clear that birthright citizenship is the law of the United States. The Congress has not passed another law that supersedes the 1898 decision in this area. So either the Congress makes law, which will be because of the way the court sees the world and sees its responsibility, will be upheld, or the court will may simply, and I will watch the rest of this, I think, with horror, if they decide, oh, well, we're not textualists today, and basically supersede Wong Kim Ark versus the USA. That remains to be seen. This is a court that's full of surprises.
I wonder if many of the people that you wrote about in your book would have opted today to not come.
It is it's an interesting and ambivalent feeling that some of them had about the country's contemporary attitude toward immigrants. They are grateful that the United States took them in. In many cases, they said, a story like mine is not possible if I had gone to any other country on the planet. They recognize that both the privileges that they enjoy today, the affluence they enjoy today, the ability to work and raise their children as they see fit that they enjoy today, was made possible by the fact that this country took them in. So there's a love and there's a reverence for that, and at the same time, a worried sort of onlooking as we go through our gyrations now. 1 week, Donald Trump says, oh, well, we're going to give a break to hoteliers and farmers. And the next week he says, no, I didn't mean that. And, some people say it's always good to be the last person who talks to him. He may have gotten his coat pulled by some of the hardliners in this area and started to back off. And now he's saying it again. So We'll see which week they actually enforce which rules. But a lot of the people who spoke to me were really sad to see what was going on now. Some of them came from countries, like Iran, and they were not altogether sure that everything would be smooth sailing once they got here. I talked to the Africans who came here, and they were very well aware of this country's tortured history in race relations and said, look, we all know that. When you grow up in Africa, you look upon the United States as a place that's still worth it to take a chance on, even though you know that history is there. So, I have to say that some of them were taking a wait-and-see attitude on how this era plays out, and they were aware that it could get worse for immigrants. One guy took a guy who came as a Vietnamese boat person, took a totally dollars and cents, self-interested, but enlightened self-interest. He said the country needs scientists and computer technicians and college professors and researchers, but it also needs busboys and waiters and bakers and agricultural workers and people who clean offices at night. And when you take people in, America has always assumed before that a certain number of the people who come in will be the people who clean offices or bus tables. And a certain number will be the people who go to become postdocs. And instead of going back to their home country, they stay here to become wealthier and more secure. And he said, look, America should understand that it is a haven for people who are running away from places, and many of them will become the different things that America needs.
There are some people here legally, some are not. His argument that they're breaking the law, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, they are breaking the law. They are in violation of various items on the statute books. That much is absolutely true. It is absolutely true that every country in the world has the right to control its borders, make the rules for who comes here, who stays, and under what circumstances. That's all true. But the fact that there are some unknown number, probably north of 15 million people living here long term, who did not follow the rules in order to become residents of the United States, should not be seen as a blot on them, because in many cases they just thought they were saving their lives or saving their families or just making a better way for their families. It should be seen for what it is: policy failure, a bipartisan, long-term, decade-to-decade policy failure. The United States has not made a significant law regarding immigration in 40 years. And during those 40 years, the Berlin Wall fell, the Cold War ended, simmering regional conflicts created millions of people on the move. And we just think this outdated Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 is just going to carry us for the next 75 years. It's not. We have not responded to a changed world where tens of millions of people are on the move, where any given night, millions of people will lay their head on a pillow in a country that is not a place that they want to live or a place that they are from. And instead of recognizing that, instead of saying to the world, yes, world, we recognize that there is a problem. Whether you are Congo struggling to manage tens of thousands of Rwandans, or Kenya struggling to manage tens of thousands of Somalis, or Britain struggling to manage hundreds of thousands of people who have tried to get in there from everywhere. France, with a an encampment in Calais on the English Channel called the Jungle that's filled with refugees from everywhere. If you're one of the navies patrolling the Mediterranean, trying to stem the flow of people in terrible dinghies and rafts and small craft from Libya, from Tunisia, we should have all been talking to each other about how to address this. Instead, the United States has reverted to ad hocery. It's winked, even though we know that there's a 1,000-foot high blinking neon sign over the United States that says help wanted. We know that these people come in and work. We know that 3 sizable industries are based on their labor: construction, hospitality. That includes the restaurant industry and agriculture. We know. And yet we just thought that because it's just hard, we weren't going to make any new laws and we weren't going to meet the needs of the 21st century. So yeah, you can land like a ton of bricks on some guy who's putting up drywall in New York, or you can recognize this for what it is, a failure on the part of the United States government.
Well, and you know, in the case here in Vermont, the 2 people that were picked up delivering food to farm workers were stopped and, you know, had their car window broken because they wouldn't quote unquote cooperate. Tell me how you said earlier you think this is going to get worse. How so?
Well, I think when the encampment that Republicans are giddily calling Alligator Alcatraz in the Everglades fills up and becomes a miserable place to be, as more and more private prisons, opaque places, fill up with people who are being held incommunicado from their own families, as more people don't show up for work, as more crops go unpicked, as more cows go unmilked, we will, each of us in our own way and in our own time, finally say, I don't know, this is a little uglier than I bargained for. I'm not in for this. And that will start to feed back into the national legislature, and there'll be some resistance to it. Already we're seeing just regular old people on the street getting in between truculent ICE agents and the people they're targeting. I think there are people in the executive branch who see the video of agents on the floor beating up a 60-year-old guy. They know that that's not good for them. In the long term, they know that it's enjoyed, it's loved by many of the people who are their partisan partners in this, and it sends a message that the United States is getting tough. I think a lot of people will realize that that's only going to backfire, that kind of thing.
But you know, I'm wondering if there's any real recourse. I mean, well, let me ask you this. How concerned are you about the state of American democracy, given the Congress, Supreme Court? There doesn't really seem to be the guardrails that we had in the past.
I'm worried only because I covered Washington for 30 years. And had lectures.
You were there for Watergate.
I remember Watergate very well, and I remember Iran-Contra, and I remember checks on the executive branch from the Congress, the Church Commission. I remember all these insistences from Republicans and Democrats on the primacy of the branches and their ability to act independently, of the separation of powers, of the ability to dig in your heels and say, no, you can't go around me, over me, or under me. We have to talk. And I am sorry to see how weak in the knees the Republican Party has become as a president looks to be hell-bent on testing the full might of the unitary executive theory, where we almost elect serial dictators. We go into the voting booths and we elect a chief executive who can do anything they want. That's the theory that's being put forward, that because the president wants to do it, it is legal, and the circumstances under which he or she can be stopped are few and are highly constrained. I think we are looking on, some of us in horror, some of us with glee, as Donald Trump, who is a person with very few guardrails to begin with, looks very much intending to test the unitary executive theory to its absolute full application. We'll see where that goes. Certainly the courts don't look inclined to stop him. This is the same Supreme Court that ruled just before he became president that basically whatever the president does in the commission of his duties is legal. Really a departure from 245 years of jurisprudence. So, this is a story that remains to be told. We're not really clear where all this is going yet.
You think it's a blip?
I don't know. Some of it will subside when a more conventional politician becomes president. But as with the history of the last 50 plus years since Richard Nixon, it's something that levels up with each president. They take some of the perks provided by their predecessor pushing the boundaries. It's not like Democrats come to office and say, hey, we're back. We're going to build down the powers of the presidency now. There were little signs of that with the War Powers Act and various other signs along the way. But I think the next Democratic president is not going to totally unburden themselves from the way that Donald Trump has increased the footprint of the job. So it's a challenge to Congress, and I think really a decades-long challenge that begins when the Trump presidency ends. He has taken this a long way, and let's be honest, it's only been less than 150 days, and he's taken it as far as he has. Who knows where things will stand on January 21st, 2029, when the next president takes the oath of office. There may be so many checks and balances trashed, so many guardrails simply ridden over, so many legal niceties and customs of branch deference totally washed away, that we may be in a very different world by then, January of 2029. And, depending on who becomes president, we may want to read the Constitution again, see what it says, or not. Well, J.V. Last over at the Bulwark, always a provocative read, suggests in his column today that there is no coming back from Trumpism, that he doesn't estimate that the Democrats are going to be ready to do the hard work of reclaiming the Constitution from the idea of limitless Article II powers and a unitary executive. I guess we'll see. I have no crystal ball in that regard, and I just don't know whether that's something that's highly valued by the public. So whether they want a president who is reined in by both custom and practice.
How worried are you right now about the country, about democracy? Is that overblown? Is it fair?
Oh, no, I don't think it's overblown at all. I'm pretty worried about the country. I'm pretty worried about democracy. I think there are good reasons to be, without being hyperbolic. without comparing the current president to the great dictators of history. You don't have to do that. This is a moment where someone has gotten themselves elected who does not share what a lot of other people might consider the essential design of the Constitution, which is specifically to not make the president's powers limitless and not make the president himself the sole arbiter of what his limits are, which is what Trump is trying to do right now. And not really being, to his credit, he's not really being shy or hidden about it. He is right out there doing it and being cheered by a sizable percentage of the public.
Are you surprised by the lack of pushback by the Republican members of Congress, the Supreme Court, either of those two institutions?
I would have been surprised if you had asked me 10 years ago. I am not surprised now. It's Donald Trump's Congress, and Mike Johnson is going to have to deal with with history's decision about whether turning over the House of Representatives to the president, any president of any party at any time, is a great idea. And that's what he's done.
If you wrote this book that you wrote today, would it be different?
I think the warnings in the last two chapters would be in the first two chapters. I think this has gone further, faster than I would have thought was going to happen. I would have thought that the public's own distaste would put the brakes on. And we're just going to have to go a lot further down this road before that happens, if it happens. One of the things that happened during the pandemic is that we proved we don't really care about each other that much, or as much as I would have hoped. And that being the case, I think it's an easier country to pull some of this off in than it would have been before the pandemic. There's less fellow feeling. There's more overt, open, and frank disparaging of empathy and sympathy, of fellow feeling, of social cohesion. And that is an era that was ushered in. It was already on its way, but I think it was supercharged by the pandemic.
All right, I can't end on that note. What gives you hope, Ray?
I think once the full array of what the president and his current partners in government have cooked up for the country makes itself apparent, I think there will be pushback, that there will be recalibration, that there will be coming back from this. I don't think we're in a headlong rush into becoming Hungary or Russia or anything like that. I think countries sometimes lose their way a little bit. Countries experiment with ideas that might have at one other time seemed injurious or not keeping with their ideals or their creed. And, we're a pretty old social order. To have the same constitution that you had 250 years ago, 236 years ago, is remarkable in the annals of world government. So when cracks show, we have a self-repairing constitution. We came back from a civil war. We came back from capitalism having a nervous breakdown and really a lot of opportunities for people to be horrid to each other in their desperation and their fear. We've come back from bigger problems than we've got now. So I think we have the wit to do that, and eventually we'll have the will. But we don't right now.
Let me ask you one more question. What do you say to young people today?
Well, I am the father of 3 young people, and they are 36, 34, and 25. And the 25-year-old is pretty sour about the state of play. You know, the other kids are worried, but they are not worried in the way that my 25-year-old daughter is, who basically says, game over. You guys really messed up the world, and I don't think there's any coming back from it. She is far more pessimistic about our ability to repair our institutions and set the country back on track than my older children are. Even though it's half a generation between them, it's a generational difference, I think.
What do you say to her?
I say to her that the world always seems like it's a pretty dire place, and that good people have to keep their eyes on each other, and watch each other's backs, and work toward making the world a better place. It's all we can do. Surrendering to hopelessness just doesn't seem like a very good response to the state of play right now.
One other thing I want to ask you is, as a journalist, it feels, I've been a journalist, you're a little bit older than me, but not much. It does seem as though almost the rules have changed. Do you feel that way too?
He said, she said journalism was already a problem. And the news business, as it was constituted, was flirting with irrelevance by doing he said, she said reporting. As has been said many times by many critics of the business, the job of a journalist is not to sit in a room where people are arguing about whether there's a thunderstorm on or not. It's listening to what they have to say and then going to the window and opening it to check, because there actually is an objective reality at play. And sometimes that's harder to tease out. And our workplaces have become sped up, and layoffs have made it harder to do the kind of spade work and leg work that checking up on objective reality requires. So you end up just reporting that so-and-so said that this is the case. And you're not going to necessarily wade in yourself and say whether or not that's true. You just have to report what they said, and we're in trouble. That kind of reporting it was not serving us well, and really seems inadequate to the task right now.
That wraps it up for this edition of 802 News, sponsored by Red Hen Baking Company. Thanks for listening.